you are going to remember this session above all other sessions you have attended so far. Thank you. You all are requested to take your seats, please, and put your phone on the silent mode. Thank you. Very good morning, all of you. First of all, I would like to request the chair for the session, Ms. Sharmila Bhartari, and the main speaker, Ira Pande, and the discussants, Sanjeev Chopra ji, to please come on the stage. A big round of applause for the wonderful personalities for today's session. Freedom disciplines mind. This is the essence of the Shantiniketan. That's the institution, a wonderful institution set up by none other than but the Rabindranath Tagore. And today, we all have gathered here to discuss the book Amader Shantiniketan, Hamara Shantiniketan. My sincere apologies, Amader Shantiniketan, which is written by the Padma Shri Gaurapant Shivani. And today we have with us Ms. Ira Pande, who is a daughter of Shivani. And think this discussion on this book, this becomes really very important in today's context when the issue of restructuring of Indian education system, the core issue of learning, that is very, very important. So I think there is a lot to learn from the institution set up by Rabindranath Tagore. So let me take this privilege first to introduce the chair of today's session, Ms. Sharmila Bhartari. Sharmila Bhartari, an ace Indian classical Odissi dancer and vocalist and theatre personality, hailing from Bengal discipline of late Guru Shantanu Devi and Maya Bhattacharya, currently residing in the state of Uttarakhand, situated at the foothills of Himalaya, uses her form of dance, which also includes Rabindrik, to promote conservation of environment, biodiversity, and cultural heritages of India. She has also taught in the University of Montana, USA. She is also a member with National Mission Clean Ganga as a performer. To name a few of the performances to her credit: the Saga of Bhagirathi, Save Ganga; the Bhageshwari, Save Tiger; and Vasundhara, about global warming. She has also produced some wonderful dance dramas also and won awards to name few of her festivals. These are the Sindhu Darshan Ladakh, the Haridwar Mahotsav, International Yoga Festival Rishikesh, Bishnupur Festival West Bengal, Kal Chakra Telangana, Jammu Kashmir International Herbal Festival Madhya Pradesh. There are also few of the Tagore and other productions to her credit only: the Forever Tagore, the Chitrangada, Chandalika, Abhisar, Karna Kunti Samvad. It's a beautiful combination of the drama, poetry, and dance. So a big round of applause for the chair of today's session. Now I would like to introduce the main speaker in today's session, the Ira Pande. Ira Pande started her career as a lecturer in the Punjab University, later switching to editing and publishing, and later worked with several prominent English language publishing houses. Her last editorial stint was a chief editor of India International Centre's publication division. In 2005, she wrote a memoir of her mother titled Didi, My Mother's Voice, documenting the life and times of Shivani. In 2010, she got the Sahitya Akademi Award for her translation of Manohar Shyam's Joshi book and also won the Crossword Book Award for the translation. She writes a regular column for the Tribune. A big round of applause for Ms. Ira Pande. Now, the main discussant. Right, okay. So I would like to request the chair of today's session to kindly begin the session. Thank you.
Namaskar and namaskar, and we've already heard everything. And Padmashri, Gaurapant, Shivani ji, and daughter Ira Pande already here, and I will not take much time because Dr. Sanjeev Chopra doesn't need any introduction. So we will start because you will enjoy the session so much. But just to pay a little homage, since I am a Ravindrik dancer, and when we talk about Rabindranath Tagore and Shantiniketan, I have just want to pay a little tribute through my little dance. And one of the first poetry which was recited by Shivani ji under the guidance of Gurudev. So Abhisar's poetry, I'm just going to show you a few steps on it. May I have your permission?
সন্ন্যাসী উপগুপ্ত মথুরাপুরীর প্রাচীরের তলে একদা ছিলেন সুপ্ত। নগরীর দীপ নিবেছে পবনে, দুয়ার রুদ্ধ পৌর ভবনে, নিশীথের তারা শ্রাবণ গগনে, ঘন মেঘে অবলুপ্ত। কাহার নূপুর সিঞ্চিত পদ সহসা বাজিল বক্ষে, সন্ন্যাসী বর চমকি জাগিল, স্বপ্ন জরিমা পলকে ভাগিল, রূঢ় দ্বীপের আলোক লাগিল, ক্ষমা সুন্দর চক্ষে। নগরীর নটি চলে অভিসারে যৌবন মদে মত্তা, অঙ্গে আঁচল সুনীল বরণ, রুনুঝুনু রবে বাজে আভরণ, সন্ন্যাসী গায়ে পড়িতে চরণ, থামিল বাসবদত্তা। প্রদীপ ধরিয়া হেরিল তাহার নবীন গৌরকান্তি। সৌম্য সহাস তরুণ বয়ান, করুণা কিরণে বিকচ নয়ান। শুভ্র ললাটে ইন্দু সমান, ভাতিছে স্নিগ্ধ শান্তি।
Now I will just give the entire session to Sanjeev sir and ma'am.
Thank you very much, Chair, for that absolutely wonderful rendition. And I think it's a great honor for us that the Chair stepped in first with the first steps. Uh, First of all, congratulations for winning the WOW Award for Translation. In fact, she's not new to WOW because if some of us recall, 2017 also we had a session with you on the book Diddi. So this is an absolutely fantastic book. It's very easy reading. So what we'll do is, I'll ask her. I mean, we've all. So I'll, we'll talk about Shantiniketan and we'll talk about Shivani ji. Shivani ji had spent 11 years of her life there, 1935. 9 years, 1935 to 1944. The most youthful time that she had in her life was spent there. Translation is a very difficult prospect. But if there's someone who could have translated Shivani, I don't think anyone could have done a better job than you, ma'am. And a round of applause is due to you for having brought Shivani live to all of us. It is rather unfortunate. It is rather unfortunate that, like the convent educated boys and girls whom many of us did not receive the privilege, I would say, of having good education in Hindi, and we have to make up for it by translations. Hopefully the next generation will learn Hindi with equal felicity. But till such time as it happens, and because we're becoming more and more global, it was very important to put Shivani on the global stage. The first thing which strikes us is, that we normally associate cosmopolitanism with big cities. We think that New York is cosmopolitan, Mumbai is cosmopolitan, or, Chennai is not so, but Bombay, Calcutta consider themselves to be cosmopolitan places. But Rabindranath Tagore set up a cosmopolitan environment in a bucolic atmosphere of Birbhum. And I think that's unique, perhaps nowhere in the world. Would you like to say something about it?
First of all, I want to say that I never went to Shantiniketan. This book is not really mine, so I'm not the person who should be answering these questions. The book was written by my mother almost 60, 65 years ago.
You have not been to Shantiniketan?
I've never been. I've never been to Shantiniketan.
Okay.
However, but we grew up.
But I must say that the way you have described Shantiniketan and the wordplay.
She has. I have merely translated it.
But fine, but still, I think it comes alive. It comes out so
No,
alive.
I think it's because Sanjeev, my aunt and my uncle were lifelong devotees of the ashram. And their family, our family was one part of their family, of course, that was their blood family, but the larger family they had was the students they grew up with, each of whom went on to become really spectacular, some of whom she has written about and I've translated. What I'm saying is that, this book was written many, many decades ago. And because my mother was a very, how shall I say, unworldly person who never promoted herself or whatever, it was given to New Age publishers in Calcutta who have now wound up. And this was one of those left-leaning publishing houses which came up in the, in the 60s or whenever it was written, 50s. I don't think they ever did anything to promote the book, and why she gave a Hindi book to a Calcutta-based publisher, I will never figure out. It was one of her early books. So it was almost lost until they wound up and she got the copyright back, and then it was published by Rajkamal Publishers. So it's had a fairly rollicking kind of journey, but I had always wanted to write about it, and I never thought of translating it, but it was such a fascinating book. And what is most important to remember is that I've heard my mother's adult voice. She's written all her books and fiction and essays or travelogues, whatever she wrote, when she was well past her 40th year. This is the only book where you actually hear a child's voice. And for me, that was the challenge. You know, I've heard my mother as a mother, as a daughter would hear a mother. And but to find a child in her opened up a completely new world for me. And I realized that what she became after she got married and came away from a very different background to a very different, my Nana's family was a very different, liberal, progressive. I mean, these were children who were sent to Shantiniketan from Almora. Just imagine in 1935, when nobody would go even up to Nainital alone. So that in itself should tell you how different her own family. Plus, she was born in Rajkot in Gujarat and traveled with her parents to all kinds of places because my Nana was working with the princely state. So she had a very different life before she got married. She got married like all Pahadi women do, and at least till her generation and my generation, to a fellow Kumauni. And this family, my Dadaji's family, was as conservative and patriarchal as all Pahadi families are, and Brahmanical. So when she used to sing beautifully, because she sung for many of those dance dramas that she mentions, Takir Desh and all the Varsha Mangal songs. She had learned music from the greatest gurus there. But my Dada told her कि हमारे घर की बहू है गाना गा के पैसा नहीं कमाती. So she was not allowed to sing. And in fact, there's one line where I think she's talking of Kshiti Mohan Babu, who is Amartya Sen's Nana, who was a great Kabir scholar and very fond of my mother, and she used to learn a lot of Kabir bhajans from him. So he told her, one day you will make a great name for yourself as a singer. And she says very regretfully that was one prophecy that I was never able to fulfill because she was just not allowed. However, her interest in music comes across throughout not just this book, but she really did know a lot about Indian classical music. And what she learned in Shantiniketan, she sort of nurtured inside her and remained a lifelong student of anything new. That is one great quality which I saw in her, and she was a great teacher. I mean, if all of us have managed to achieve anything in our lives, she made teaching, learning a joyful occupation, which is what she had learnt in the ashram. So, exams were never heavy. She says, we didn't sit in classrooms with closed walls and ceilings. We sat under the trees. And all the trees had squirrels running up. Birds used to sit up and set up a noisy conference. Some santhal would go past with a flute. And these children were allowed to, but they learned, each one of them, whether it is Satyajit Ray or Mrinalini Sarabhai, Jaya Appaswamy. I mean, there are legion students from that time who have all gone on. So obviously there was something about the freedom and about the the curiosity that yesterday when we were talking about, Rudrangshu was talking about the difference between Gandhiji's emphasis, yes, and Tagore, he felt that you can't close people's minds. And that really is what I think, the explosion of curiosity and a deep interest in everything, from a tree, from a monkey used to come into her veranda and sit with her. My mother used to call her Ramkali. And she said, मुझे लगता है कि ये पढ़ी लिखी थी बेचारी, because ये रोज सुबेरे आके मेरे साथ अखबार पढ़ती है. So she used to sit there because my mother used to feed her biscuits or whatever. So, to build a bond even with animals and was a quality which I truly admired in my mother. And I hope that I've been able to preserve that sense of wonder and that sense of learning.
Absolutely, that sense of
Which-
wonder is absolute, absolute. In fact, see, all Bengalis had tak naam. Even we realized in service that tak naam was there. In fact, Shivani had a tak naam for almost everybody there. And I'd like you to narrate to them. You see, the protests in Shantiniketan were also wonderful. I mean, like all hostel food. I mean, the kids got fed up with the hostel food in Shantiniketan also. And they carried out something called the Aloo Portal protest. And Aloo happened to be the Bhagna of one of the persons. So he got very upset. And his brother was called Portal. So they got, so maybe
Yeah,
you could narrate that.
that's a lovely story. She says that, there was, for some reason, somebody in the mess had bought quantities of potol, which is parval. And morning, evening, night, these children were being fed. So, kuch din tak to, the poor things, they had to suffer it. Then finally, Jaya Appaswamy, the artist, she made a big poster saying, Dhik potol, Dhik aloo, and nothing happened. Then they went to their mess in charge. And they said, please save us from this nonsense. What is this? Even in the fish you put potol. So he says, this is an ashram. You have come here not for eating fancy food. And that was that. So then they all went in a delegation to Gurudev. And he was sitting writing in his lawn in Shamuli. And they said, my mother was the person she said, we told Gurudev that, please deliver us from potol, and the whole story of why potol and things. Gurudev had a very favorite acolyte, a chap who used to constantly, he was like his secretary or whatever. He got up and gathered his dhoti, did pranam to Gurudev and walked away. So Gurudev asked him, Kya ho gaya? Why are you walking away? He said, how can I stay here, Maharaj? You've heard the children say, deliver us from potol, so we have to go. And he says, I'm going to collect my brother, who's also called Alu. Alu Dan. So that is how this whole, then the children dissolved into laughter and that. So she always says that, he was so many things. He was a great writer, poet, musician. He had so many accomplishments. But to us, he was like a father figure who would take time off to even solve a small problem of an aloo potol overkill. So there are
So many such instances, and in fact, there's the whole story of the number of yawns which you can have, because you could tell us about that, because it's something which I've noticed, even in the LBS Academy, everybody tends to yawn. And especially if you've had a good meal, perhaps that is the reason they served aloo potol. But you don't need much. But so many kinds of yawns. So maybe we could speak about that.
Tanmoy, I think.
Shivani had to yawn, but she tried to, not yawn.
Yeah, no, that's a very funny story. Another, there was one teacher who was Tanmoy, a very strict teacher, the story that Sanjeev is talking about. And he hated anybody getting distracted in his class, even though they were sitting in the outside. And she says, if anyone yawned, that person was thrown out of class. So she said, I felt a yawn coming. And she said, there's a horrible truth about yawns, that if one yawns, then everyone begins yawning. So she said, I put my head down and I tried to control it. So Tanmayda said, there are two kinds of yawn. One which is shameless, where you open your mouth and you distract everyone. The other is a very clever one. Your nostrils flare up, your eyes dilate. So he called my mother and wrote a V on her forehead with chalk and threw her out. And everyone tittered, Vaishnavi, even their cook. He said, so Didi, why were you punished today? So, But there was one character in that book which I loved called Sarju Maharaj.
Yes, yes.
So, the ashram had people from all over, from India, from Java, Sumatra, Borneo, China, Japan, and some of them, there were many, many who came from places where they only liked their kind of food. So they brought their cooks. This is a habit which a lot of people had. Even I remember Allahabad, these boys used to have hostel messes where they brought their own cooks along with them. Anyway, so there was only this UP lot who had no cook for themselves. Then, because nobody was willing to come so far away. So then they got a Bihari cook called Sarju Maharaj. Sarju Maharaj used to love music. And so he thought he was in heaven because, there was always music in the ashram. And whenever he heard of a rehearsal, wo apna gamcha bandh ke, he used to land up there and sing lustily with the, whether he could match the pace and tone. But he added Hey Rama to everything. So whatever was being sung, Pagla Hava, Hey Rama, Badol Dine, Hey Rama. So he was, so there are wonderful stories that my mother has. Some which she's recorded and some which I've heard about. And I in the preface that I've written, I wanted to share, for instance, Amartya Sen, his grandfather, Kshiti Mohan Babu, was one of her teachers. And his mother, I think his father used to live in Burma, so she used to come every summer to spend time with her parents. And he was a little boy who his pet name was Bablu. And so when the mother came to visit her friends in the girls' hostel, this little Bablu used to come along too and sit on everyone's lap. And my mother used to say, "Maine Bablu ka nada banda hai." Nobel Prize was going. Yeah, now I can't write that. But those are the kind of people. Yeah, so yeah.
But I think you see, and also, the pranks which Shivani played, two of them are remarkable. So there was this little advertisement in the Tribune, and that Tribune ad still continues that want a convent-educated, beautiful bride for someone, caste and dowry no bar. And the man introduced himself as a Western-educated Rajput gentleman. So what happened from there, you can tell us the story.
Well, this was somebody from Lahore, I think, very...
No, the chap was stationed in Calcutta, Grand.
No, he came to Calcutta. He belonged to Lahore.
Belonged to Lahore.
And this was pre-independence. So Lahore was part of India. Anyway, he'd sent this ad for a thing. My mother was so angry. How dare he ask for, apni shakal dekhi hai usne ki nahi. And so they made up a story about somebody called Ganga Devi. I don't know what name they gave. And she and her friend Kamla Malik sat and wrote out this wonderful thing that, she's beautiful, she's this, she's that. So promptly that man wrote back saying, "I've come to Calcutta and I'm coming to Shantiniketan." Tab city pitti gum ho gayi because they would have been expelled for doing this. So they went to another Gurdial Malik, a teacher of theirs, who was a very well-known and well-loved teacher. And they said, "Please save us." So he said, "What have you done?" And when they told him, he said, "You donkeys, do you know that you can be expelled for this?" And my mother's elder sister was by then the assistant warden, and she said, "Agar usko pata chal gaya, to meri to abhi naak kat jayegi." Anyway, he said, "You are very lucky. I know this family very well. Don't worry, I'll take care of it." So he took care of it, but my mother says that for a little while our blood ran cold because we thought if this man comes here and he...
And then you see they had an expedition to Benares. So that again was a very interesting story. Because apart from eating Banarasi Pan, they did other very interesting stuff as well. So maybe you could...
Yeah, there's so many stories in that. But I want to spend a little time on the second half of the book,
sure.
which is actually, the first half is a tribute to her gurus. And it begins by saying that when I look back upon my life, I feel I'm in a corridor. On both sides are the gurus who stand next to me and they say, "Pay back what we have given you." So she says, "This is my gift back to the guru." So each one of those great gurus is sort of celebrated and talked about, and in that process, the whole atmosphere of that Guru Palli, where the gurus used to stay, the relationship they had with their students, and there's a palpable sense of love and respect which was mutual. It wasn't that they got up and said salam to their teacher all the time, but you could sense that it was such a deep, deep connection. So the first half of the book is about that, about the various festivals. They had the Paush Mela and Gandhiji's birthday, 2nd October and so on. And it ends with the death of Tagore and his body being taken from the ashram. The second half of the book, because this was such a slim little book, I thought if I do this, it will not even add up to 50, 60 pages. So my sister and I decided that she's written so much about the ashram, which is not just about Gurudev, but about all those people who she went, who studied with her, and who she was extremely fond of, and they were really, really eminent people. And each time one of them passed away or something happened, she always wrote a very moving obituary. She was a wonderful writer of obituaries. So the second half of the book is actually a collection of all those. There were many more which I had to stop, right? Because, then the balance of the book would go a little askew. But there's one on Satyajit Ray, which is truly, I think, one of the best pieces I've ever read on Satyajit Ray. There's one which she wrote on her older sister Jayanti, who was one of the siblings who went. It's called Nadi Jo Marusthal Mein Kho Gayi, because she was such a wonderful person, but she just gave up her life to becoming a mother and buried herself somewhere. Others too, there's... so that second half is also a very special part of her life. And as a homage to her time in Shantiniketan, I think the two needed to be put together to get a sense of what Shantiniketan was. When I was doing this book, Sanjeev, it was done, I translated and finished it. It just took a little time. The West Bengal elections were taking place.
Okay.
And there was such acrimony and so much ladai jhagda about outsiders and insiders. ये कौन है, ये बाहरी हैं, ये अंदरी हैं. एक देश में हम रहते हैं, तुम बाहरी हो, मैं अंदरी हूँ, ये कोई बात होती है? And then I thought I must, this book really needs to be remembered for, as you say, creating a cosmopolitan world. Where would my mother, had she lived in Almora or Rajkot or wherever, where would she have met all these wonderful people who remained friends for life? She learned so many languages with them, so much in the way of cultural exchange that happened between students. And this experiment is something which we have just not been able. We've got great schools now. There are some schools which are doing marvelous work in pedagogy and liberal progressive thinking and so on, but they're very expensive schools. You and I can't afford to send our children there.
They're also all in English language. That is another thing. You see, here was
in fact,
Bangla
one of
being
the early things that, when they went, my mother and her two siblings, they were so overawed because everyone spoke Bangla. They didn't know a word of Bangla. And socho 10-11 saal ke bachche, they must have been really scared. It's like one of my grandchildren who came to India from Brazil. And in the beginning, they didn't know any other language but Portuguese. So it was so difficult for them to get accustomed to a school where Hindi and English were the main languages. So these three were really frightened and homesick and miserable. So they were taken by their warden to Gurudev's house. And she says, as long as I live, I will never forget my first glimpse of Gurudev. It was evening, and Bolpur has this red earth, and the sun was setting, so there was a kind of ethereal glow in that atmosphere. And Gurudev himself was a very dramatic figure in that long flowing chokha with his cat. He was writing something, and he looked up, so the warden said that these are children who've come from Almora. So she said, we went to touch his feet, and he asked he had a very soft speaking voice. He asked my mother, are you very homesick? So she said, I wondered how he could find out. And he said, then learn Bangla. And she says, I'm proud to tell you that Sahaj Path, which is the primer, that Gurudev taught her that. And what Sharmila just performed before you, she was asked to recite this poem in front of very eminent Bengali writers, and Gurudev said, look, this is a girl who's come from Kumaon. Many of you have not even heard of that region. And her accent and her pronunciation is absolutely perfect. So all you people who don't speak Bengali, who are Bengali, should learn that languages are the bridges to cultures. And he was the first person who, not just from India, he brought China Bhavan, Professor
Yes, China Bhavan,
Tansen.
yes.
He set up China Bhavan, and whoever looked at China as a, there's even now in Japan, there are universities where Tagore's works are taught. So, those are lasting connections, and we've never really cared to be. We keep talking about civilizational this and our boundaries were there. Who cares? Those boundaries have been erased because you have never nurtured them. You have never learned. Even now, friends who go to Uzbekistan or whatever, you sing any of these Mera Juta Hai Japani, that soft power, which now has become a very important part of our diplomatic endeavor, was something that Tagore instinctively realized and put into place. So that, I think, is an important.
Absolutely
part
important.
of
And in
it.
fact, also the fact that your eldest Mama couldn't learn Bangla, and then Gurudev told him, stop. There's no need to learn Bangla.
Aaj amake maach khabe.
That reminds me of a Bengali lessons when you were in the academy. You see, we didn't have a Bengali teacher at that time. So they asked a batchmate to teach us, which didn't work actually. But the fact is that it's so sad to see Shantiniketan. I mean, it's very sad for those of us. I mean, we have never seen the past glory of Shantiniketan. I mean, only heard of it. But, and I'm glad I hadn't read this book when I went to Shantiniketan in my service career, otherwise I would have been absolutely depressed on seeing what Shantiniketan has become. It also teaches us how to destroy institutions. I mean, Shantiniketan is one institution which is, I don't know, I think it is beyond repair perhaps, but it is a great tragedy. And I think it's a larger issue on, and maybe you could reflect on this. Why is it that we lose our institutions? It's a deeper philosophical question.
I can't say for everything, but all these institutions, whether Shantiniketan or Rukmini Devi Arundel's Kalakshetra or Mrinalini Sarabai's Darpan Academy, there are so many. These are all centered on one central personality, and who was truly, head and shoulders above everyone else. And when that person goes, one, you don't groom people. That's very sad. We don't ever learn how to groom people to take over. We think, hum hai, hamesha rahenge. That's not true. We'll go away in a few years. If you want your values and your systems to remain in place, you have to start teaching people and mentoring people. You're not in competition with them. Let them take on the task. This is something which I think we have to learn.
And we have to
that
learn
humility.
This is perhaps something that, you one find that institutions like Oxford, Cambridge, Cornell, Harvard, they somehow or the other have managed to retain a sense of continuity.
It must be something to do with the Western and
Perhaps
Oriental.
that is something which we need to critically actually analyze and find out why this happened. But okay, let's go back to the book, because another very interesting is how they looked at the stars. These days, Roorkee gives you telescopes and people are installing telescopes. You have the stargazing clubs, something in Ladakh which has come up so you can see the sky. But tell us how in Shantiniketan, how they gazed at the sky. That's so fascinating and so wonderful.
Acharya Hajai Prasad Dwivedi,
Yes.
who was a great scholar of not just Hindi, but of Sanskrit and of astronomy. In our traditional Gurukul system, astronomy, astrology, all these were part of philosophy and a larger sort of social science menu of learning. So he used to tell the children, I am now enough for today. You come at night to my house and I'll show you stars. So they used to all go to his house, and then he would point out the Akash Ganga, the Milky Way, and the Saptarishi, the seven, and he used to, so I was telling Sanjeev this, I said, in our country, first of all, to join two planetary systems together. The Western way of looking at, they're the same planets that they see, that we see, but somehow our relationship with our planets is more intimate, partly because they are considered to be very important influences on our lives. Horoscopes in India, as you know, and astrologers have a very elevated position. And uska mangal uच्च का है, उसका शुक्र नीच का है. All this is constantly
And then,
सबके
I
कानों
think
में पड़ा है.
perhaps Brahman, Brahman
हाँ,
knowledge,
हाँ.
wisdom, Brahman.
And
I mean, these three words, Brahman, Brahman.
so, Professor Adhikari, later when she talks about Professor Adhikari, he was one of the greatest authorities on Mimamsa, but also a great astronomer and astrologer. So, my mother herself was very good with astrology, and she used to tell me, "Tumhara ye wala phase tumhara." And before she died, this is the last story I'm going to tell. Before she died, she called each one of us to her room to give us a special message. So to me, she said that you argue a lot with your husband. मैं देखती हूँ कि तुम हर वक्त अमित के साथ झगड़ा करती हो और argue करती हो. She said, always remember, उसका केंद्र में बृहस्पति है. ऐसे लोगों को पहले से राजा लोग ढूंढ के मंत्री बनाते थे. वो तुमको जो एडवाइस देगा उसकी कभी अवहेलना मत करना. So my husband says, but that is one lesson you never followed, unfortunately. But, you know, she would relate as a writer too, I suppose, you know, you study a human being in multiple ways, but that is one story.
No, it's absolutely fantastic. Maybe if yes, please. Please, you can come up or we can give a mic to you.
I can hear you. Yeah.
सबसे पहले तो मैं ईरा दी को नमस्कार करती हूँ. मैं ईरा दी इसलिए बोल रही हूँ कि हमारे शांतिनिकेतन में हम लोग सबको दादा दीदी बुलाते थे. जैसे आपके पिताजी को भी हम दादा बोलेंगे, आपको दीदी बोलेंगे, ऐसे ही थे. तो हमारे लिए गौरा पंत या शिवानी दी होती अगर रहती. ये किताब मैं लेके आई कि because this is one of my favorite books.
Which one?
And
I can't see.
this is Shivani's Amader Shantiniketan. And Amader Shantiniketan is a song actually.
That was the
उसी में
anthem of
से-
the
Yes.
Amader Shanti.
It's a
And my mama
beautiful
used to say
song.
Amader Shantiniketan, tan, 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 because he didn't know the
And I was privileged to study there from 1975, from class 2 to 84. I passed out from there in 84. And another thing which I'll tell you that we were so lucky because our principal was another Tagore, Supriyo Tagore. And he was Rabindranath Tagore's great grandson. And because of that, and many of our teachers, like you said, Amartya Sen's mother, she used to, every morning we used to meet her. She used to come with Nabanita Dev Sen's children, and Amartya Sen's first wife's children, and but there were many people we knew, even Tan Dadu and Tan Dadi from China Bhavan. We all used to get together in the morning for Baitalik. And recently, it's a coincidence, my friend from Japan, Dr. Setsu Makino, now she's Togawa, her husband had come here and I thought I must send some gift for her. So I gifted one of these books. And another thing is from Kumaon, the Bichu Ghas Ka Stool. So these two things I sent for her. And when I came to know that Iradi is coming here, and I tried to come, and thank you so much to her because she has translated it into English. क्योंकि हमारे बहुत सारे फ्रेंड हैं जो हिंदी भाषी है लेकिन उन लोग हिंदी में बात नहीं करते, बोलते नहीं हैं, पढ़ते नहीं हैं. तो अब उन लोग पढ़ पाएंगे और वो पुराना ज़माने के शांति निकेतन को वो जानेंगे.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's not making comment, just some thoughts of mine. And Captain Woodley, I say that, then I suppose. My father, late V.B. Menon, when he was 17 years old, writes to Tagore from Kerala. He was from Palakkad. And he says, I want to come and study and sit at your feet and study. And Tagore tells him that, please come, I have a seat reserved for you. And he goes there and he studies He does BA honors there. But the man that he was, of course, he was fluent in Bengali. He was part of the Chitrangada troupe. I got some photos here. Actually, I wish I could flash it of him in the Chitrangada and Tagore's letter to him when he had to withdraw for pecuniary reasons to go back home, come back to Kerala. He says, we feel so bad that you have to go back. We wish you could stay on, But a kind of overall development and the interest that my dad had was something amazing, So coming back to your question, what the chair was also asking, where have we lost this charm of that campus? I remember him talking about the campus and our home is full of albums of Sarojini Naidu and C.F. Andrews and Gandhiji, Nehru. Indira was 2 years junior to my dad.
Yeah.
So all this, we seem to have lost it. I mean, why couldn't we take some of the good things of that and look at the terrible campuses and the universities we have now, So I just thought I'd share these with you. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, sir. Professor Satish, I come. Take this.
I think the narrative voice is very important in Shivani. And the first part of Amader Shantiniketan has the adolescent exuberance, which gradually turns to a grim tone, as, as Gurudev, has his last years and he's moving towards his death and disease. Was it easy for you to develop a parallel sensibility in order to translate her experiences, in the two narrative tones?
This is a question which only a translator can understand because one, I had the advantage of knowing my mother pretty well, so it was easy to see the changes in her voice as it went on. But more importantly, for every translator, you have to somehow enter the narrative yourself and forget your own biases or prejudices as you go along. It's easy to translate my mother, as I said, because we share the same blood. But I've translated other people too, and I always feel that, you must never forget that that book belongs to somebody else. It is X's book or Y's book. You're merely putting it into another language. And so that voice must never be tampered with. It's like being, how should I say, you adopt a child. You become the mother, you bring up that child as your own, give it all the love and affection that you can, but that child will always belong to somebody else, the person from whose womb it came out. So that's the challenge of translation, and I find that not many translators are able to cross this boundary when somewhere the voice of the translator takes over the voice of the writer. So whenever anyone says, oh, your book, I said, it's not my book, I'm merely the translator. The book belongs to my mother, will always be her book. I can't intrude on that. I never went to Shantiniketan. I've never met all these wonderful people. I was never exposed to that pedagogy. And I don't know the joys and sufferings that she must have faced in recalling all that. But yes, to the extent that I can bring it across into another language for another generation.
I think a good Sahridaya reader, in order to be a good translator,
You have.
as Sahridaya.
I am a reader.
We have time for one more question. I mean, if somebody would like.
1,000 books with her, the grand reader.
Okay.
I can only say one.
Yes,
One
please.
thing to say. Yes. I'm really privileged to, I'm so happy to see her because I'm very privileged to have lived in Lucknow alongside Shivani ji.
Okay.
That's
For
great.
several years, so like we were in the same colony, so we used to meet very often in all our colony programs, we used to call her. So we were very, pleased, and it was an honor to have us come and start way back in the early 90s.
Thank you so much, John. We shall, time is the only non-renewable resource, so we will have to sort of accept that. Before we close, there's one very pertinent line which we have discussed many times, but that is, which I picked up from your translation, which was, our freedom disciplines our minds. Maybe you could speak on this once again.
This is my mother's writing on, in the early part, how every morning all the children used to assemble in what was called the Sinha Sadan, which was a arbor of trees and flowers. And they sang hymns and devotional songs composed by Gurudev himself. And each one of them was, really majestic. That is the only way I can describe them. And she said in all the years that we were there, nobody ever missed that morning assembly, and nobody jostled or giggled like we do. If you have one giggling fit, everyone starts to giggle, And she said there was something about that ashram where, despite all the freedom that we got, they used to get, if it was raining, they were told, jao, bheeg jao. So they used to sing songs and get wet in the rain. Where in the world would you have a school where you're allowed to get wet in the rain and shriek around and play in the mud? For all that freedom, she said, that freedom disciplined our minds. They developed a kind of discipline. She was a very disciplined person. This is something which I've learned from her, is that if you have to respect time and promises. So if you've promised somebody that you'll send in something by the 10th of this month, you send it by the 9th. Don't wait for the 11th or 12th. That's something which is, you put aside everything else and keep your discipline within yourself. It shouldn't intrude into other people's lives. But yes, that was something, a lesson which she learned and she taught all of us too. My sister Mrinal is another one who can, my mother says, na, सुबह उठती है, अलैया बिलावल गाती है, फिर सब्जी छौंकती है, फिर कुछ लिख देती है संपादकी. And she was all over the place. All by herself. She subere jati thi, And what, she used to write in the Swatantra Bharat and some local paper and things. And kya unke fans the? I remember she told me once कि सुबेरे मैं वहाँ से जा रही थी, दिलकुशा जाती थी वो. And that was a very lonely and frightening part of things. So one day she was going, अंधेरा था 5:30 बजे. तो वहाँ जो कोई दूध वाला था, very frightening, वो मूंछ वाला दूध वाला. He told her कि बहू जी अकेले मत जाइए उधर. So she said कि काहे? So he said कि अच्छे लोग नहीं हैं वहाँ. Then she said कि मैंने कहा मुझे क्या होगा? He said लिखती बहुत नेक हो, अक्कल भी लगा लो. दूध वाला बताओ.
How wonderful. So I think with this, may I request the session chair to perform the last thing.
So as we started, thank you so very much. I think we had a great session with her talking. Yes, sir, one question? Yes, sir. স্যার নিশ্চয়ই বাংলায় বলবো ম্যাম, বাংলায় বলবো. মানে এত আনন্দ লাগলো আপনাদের সবাইকে দেখে, আর এনাদের নিয়ে আর এনাকে নিয়ে, যে যে বাঙালি নয় কিন্তু শিবানীজিকে আমরা ওখানে বলা হতো আমাদের মেয়ে, Am I right? Amader mein. And Bengali जब बहुत सर इमोशनल हो जाते हैं, मैं बता रही हूँ कि कल भी बहुत इमोशनल वो पढ़ रहा था. हम हमेशा कहते हैं যদি আপনি বাংলা বলতে পারেন তার মানে আপনি পূর্ণ জন্মে আমাদের মেয়ে বাঙালি ছিলেন. So शिवानी जी को बहुत बार बोला जाता था कि आप बंगाली थे, इसीलिए. So as ma'am we started with her poetry recitation जो मैम ने बताया इतना अच्छे से हुआ. আমি ফিনিশ করব আনন্দ লোকে. ঠিক আছে? হ্যাঁ ম্যাম.
মঙ্গলালোকে
end by saying sadhu, sadhu. That's what they do in Shantiniketan. Tali bajana mana hai, so we'll all say sadhu, 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 sadhu.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you.
There was no words from us to us. In fact, both of us were listening like this came. जैसे सर हम ही अटेंड कर रहे हैं.
We are really very grateful to our panelists for taking us through the glorious phase of Shantiniketan and also leaving us with some very pertinent questions related with the declining relationship between the teacher and the student, the state of education in India, and more important, the lingual freedom. And I would like to end with the two lines of the session कि हर एक ज़बान को यारो सलाम करते चलो, हर एक ज़बान को यारो सलाम करते चलो, गिरोह की है न फ़िरके की और न मज़हब की. धन्यवाद.